I am ready.
Well, Virginia, we just have been talking about, of course, No Shelter But the Stars. Um, General thing is that we love the book, but it's different from your first book, Consecrated Ground. So why did you want to do a sci-fi story?
I am first and foremost, listen, don't tell my debut novel, but sci-fi is my first love. I was raised in the Church of Sci-Fi. I have loved sci-fi my entire conscious life. And I honestly, I'm not really sure why it was that Consecrated Ground was the novel that came first. When the things that I wrote before that were science fiction, and I am working on more things that are science fiction. But writing a science fiction novel was a thing that was always going to happen, and the fact that that my first novel was paranormal was a surprise to me as well.
Well, it was a great debut, so and I must say, for me, I'm not either a paranormal fan or sci-fi fan, but I read all the reviews and I was like, that Virginia Black, let's keep an eye on her. And I love the book, so I don't care whatever you write, I'll read it.
Thank you. That's very flattering, and also I appreciate that blank check. I'm gonna need it.
Good. Let's see. Michelle asks, what kind of sci-fi books and authors do you enjoy reading yourself?
I'm all over the place. I enjoy. There was much of the sci-fi that I have read is outside of the Sapphic realm. Uh, though I'm getting a lot of recommendations right now because of No Shelter for the Stars to check out some other Sapphic science fiction, like Grace Curtis, phenomenal writer. But I grew up reading things like Heinlein and Harry Harrison and survived Asimov and lived to tell the tale. But then I found authors like David Weber with the Honor Harrington series. Um, you'll hear me wax poetic a lot about Catherine V. Forrest's Daughters of a Coral Dawn and how much that shaped my brain and actually my love of Sapphic fiction. I'm trying to think of the author who wrote Trading in Danger, Elizabeth something or other, and I cannot remember the name and I will probably hit you up on the socials to list some of those other authors. But and now it's all over the place, from Ted Chiang to Annie Lee Newitz, some Charlie Jane Anders. There's a lot in that realm, and all of the subgenres in science fiction to keep me busy for decades.
Are there like any traits that you pick from your favorite authors that you would like that you incorporated in your work?
I would be lying if I said that I didn't want to write like Ted Chiang. I have this fascination, hatred for his craft of the written word. Um, but other than that, I think it's more not so much shaping the craft as, oh, here's an option for a thing that falls into this realm of speculative fiction that I never considered. Um, I'm very much I love space operas. You give me a merc with a spaceship. I'm actually working on a series that falls into that subgenre, very much into those kinds of stories. Um, but also, gosh, sort of noir within sci-fi. Some of those stories I find compelling. The surveillance state, although that may be shaped by a podcast I'm listening to right now. Working on a techno thriller that's been on the back burner for a while that I'm trying to figure out if it's going to get slated into the next few novels that I want to write. I've got one for sure on deck, but I've got 3 or 4 more where I'm like, okay, which one's next after that? And it's just a matter of persuading Bywater to let me do fun things, which they probably will. I have to be patient with how long that takes. So sci-fi inspires the things that I read, I think inspire me to look at possible stories in a different way.
So, what would you say comes first when you're writing a story? Is it some specific thing that you want to explore related to plot? Is it characters? Like what, that like kernel of a story idea that turns into something, where does that usually start for you?
It varies from story to story. There's I will always give thanks to two communities that spawned the twisted brain that I have. One is the leather community, and the other one is the fan fiction community. Um, uh, there's nothing quite like, hey, those two women on screen look really hot. They should kiss. They're not going to kiss on this show. I'm going to write that. That happens. But also, for example, I was at GCLS a couple of years ago when it was in Albuquerque, and I was out at night, and I had just been like Consecrated Ground was a thing that was happening. Like we knew it was about to come out, but it wasn't out yet. And I was sitting outside at night staring up at the moon, and I thought, what if there was a creature or a person who only lived at night but wasn't a vampire? Like, what would that be like? And what kind of character would that be? And that spawned a short story. Um, Sometimes it's okay, what if there was like a witch, but she was like she used her spellcraft to like fight evil, but I don't want it to be like X, Y, or Z. I want it to be something else. And that was the idea behind Consecrated Ground. Uh for No Shelter But the Stars, there was a movie that I saw when I was a kid, and there was a couple of concepts in that movie that I thought were really, really interesting. But I didn't really think anything of writing a story about it until much, much later, where I had this idea of what if you had two people who were completely diametrically opposed from one another and absolutely hated each other's guts? Like, what if I made a true enemies to lovers story? And there was that, and then there was the seed of some ideas from a film, and I'm like, okay, okay, what if it's in space and they're on this asteroid and they're stuck there? And my brain went off on a tangent, and Yahtzee.
Well, I'm glad it did. I quite enjoyed it. Um,
Michelle wants to know, was that movie Enemy Mine?
Of course it was.
Okay. Michelle.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely was. Which you go back and watch it, it's a terrible film. I mean, it's like a C plus at best. It definitely needed hot lesbians. Fixed it. But I write the stories that I want to read, but I can't find. I go off to Powell's, which is a huge bookstore here in Portland, Oregon, and I just walk the aisles looking for this story that scratches some itch I have in a given moment, and it's not there. And I walk around for about 45 minutes until I remember it's not there, and I have to go write it. And here we are.
I have a question for you about the different languages. One kind of about the writing decision, and then one about the characters' thought processes. So I've got a question. I think it's kind of a lofty decision to have them not speak the same language. And so I'm really curious um why you made the decision, and if you'd ever considered not doing it, and just kind of what your thoughts were about like writing something like that where they don't speak the same language, and just any difficulties you ran into that. That was very unique to me. And then this other question we've got is, why doesn't Kieran, or Kyron, we need you to tell us how to say it.
It's
um
Kieran.
Kieran, all right, you heard it here. Why doesn't Kieran want to teach Davia Elodian? So those are
So
language questions.
I'm gonna preface this by admitting something that I don't hear a lot of authors admit, and so I may be doing it wrong. Um, but there's this penchant for authors to claim that they premeditatedly, is that a word? I made it one. Aspects of their stories in a giant hashtag I meant to do that. I don't do that. There are some things that happen within the flow of the story that just develop. They just appear on the page. Not to get too woo-woo, but half the time I think I'm just channeling these weird characters and writing what they tell me to write, and this story just shows up. The fact that they did not have the same language was not something that I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if X? It just sort of happened. And later I did think, because I was trying to figure out, I'd say that one of the so you're not supposed to look at your reviews on Goodreads. Like, just don't do it. Those are for the readers. It's bad for you. Like, it's really bad for you. Don't do it. But often what I have read is there are aspects of the story that tie up rather neatly around the political galactic subplot. But I did some research on that around the British Empire and the wave of countries that claim their independence in the 60s and 70s from the British Empire, and a number of those on the African continent. And there's some validity there of completely different languages, right? English was forced on a number of countries, 25% of the world, actually. And so it was a thing that just happened, and I found a way to co-sign that thing, but I didn't really give that much thought. And the fact that Kieran wants to keep as much of herself, her culture, her, the aspects of herself to herself, that like no one has any right to that. And a lot of that ties into her own guilt about not killing Davia outright out of vengeance, out of justifiable homicide in response to oppression of decades, if not centuries, under galactic tyranny. So that's her claiming her stuff. Like, that's mine. I'm not sharing that with you. You asked me a question, Jade. I'm going to give you like.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that in the end, Davia speaks to her in like broken Elodian, and Kieran is like, that's a kind of a moment like, okay, she really wants this.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I wanted that to break her a little bit.
Mm.
I needed to be able to demonstrate for Davia that, like, Davia has a soul, obviously. I mean, as much as I, want to make her this menacing dark badass, to some extent she is. But she has a soul. She's a compassionate person. And, without getting too deep into this particular aspect of it, I wanted to show, look, royalty or not, which is a whole, this novel could be a 600-page epic, right? I did not do that dance. That is a choice that I made. Like, I want to tell this story, not this story. I gotta get in all the camera. That story. But I'm avoiding a huge racial quagmire here. I wanted Davia to take a few steps beyond expectation, right? She can't fix everything. She has determined that she has much more within her circle than she previously thought, and she has acted upon that. Once she knows that she can have that effect, she grows, she develops to address that as well as she can. One person can't fix everything, however, but studying the language and coming correct to have a conversation, that is something Davia could do. And I wanted that to come across. Also, it's romantic. It's just sweet.
Yes. True. Can I ask a question, Jade?
Yep.
Yeah. I was one thing that we talked about in the book club was the way you create the world. The world is like one thing I don't like sci-fi, let's be honest. And I love this one just because in like 2 sentences, I was in space. I was in the spaceship, I was on the moon, I was fighting the creatures, whatever. Um, how does that work? Is it something that you have like a mood board for, so you don't have to like give us pages and pages of descriptions? How do you build the world?
So it's kind of it's an expand and then contract. I do not have a mood board, but I will occasionally have like a picture of somewhere. And for many stories, I only have like 1 or 2 images, right? That are like, okay, that's what I'm trying to describe. That's what I'm trying to convey. Um, uh, don't get me started on how I told Anne McMahon none of this about what I was visualizing, and she came up with this cover, which was what, with one exception, is exactly what I envisioned for the cover. She's got spooky powers. That's all I'm saying. So don't use a mood board, but I do treat setting as a third character. And I say third because most of my stories are about 2 women and the world, beyond them. But I treat setting as a third character. At the same time, I'm working really hard in my craft to cut down on info dump. I don't want to pull a Tolkien and spend 40 pages to tell you what the mountains look like, right? Or Herbert. Herbert's more of a 10 pages kind of guy, but still. But I want to convey enough that for those of us who are visual, and I've recently learned that not all of us are, and I need to take that into account at some point. For those of us who visualize and sink into the stories that we're reading, I want to give you just enough so that what I envision and what you envision are as close as possible, right? Um, I know when it comes to characters, I can provide some framework of what those characters look like, but I really want to back up on that and let you supply what you see these characters as, because that gets you more invested in the story. But for setting, I want to make sure we're on the same page. If we're in a claustrophobic cockpit of a spaceship and that ship is falling apart, I want you to feel that, right? If you are in a wide desolate space where there is nothing and no one and you have no supplies, I want you to feel that and see that. So how do I get that? I've run through a lot of passes of, okay, I've got this description, too many words, I got to cut it down. How do I get this leaner? Still too many words. I got to get this down to half a dozen sentences sprinkled throughout a bunch of other stuff to convey that. And so it's deliberate, it's I like absolutely on purpose, but it's a lot of trimming and cutting and editing to get it as tight as possible, so that you get that while you're still flipping pages trying to, you know
Yeah, it's
stay
magnificent.
engrossed to the story.
It's I'm in awe. It's really good.
Thank you.
I think
Okay.
you did a really great job making it accessible for people to read, even if they're not sci-fi fantasy readers. So I think that you did that really well.
I appreciate that. I listen, I love a good sci-fi info dump as much as the next nerd. um But I also know that if you don't hit your story beats, people start skipping paragraphs and they start skipping pages until they get to dialogue, or they get to the sexy bits, or they get to whatever it is that they came for. Um, I'm not going to make everyone happy, but I want to create sci-fi. This this might be a little like self-deprecating. I want to make engrossing, captivating, unputdownable sci-fi pulp novels. Like, there's a certain genre of book that I used to read where I would go to the store and I would just grab the next Del Rey whatever sci-fi novel. And I read those like consuming candy. And don't remember half of those stories. Don't remember most of them, but I was constantly consuming all of those stories. But I was also looking for women loving women, right? I was looking for sapphic plots, and they weren't really there. I mean, with the exception of maybe John Varley. And that's the niche I'm trying to fill. That's the shelf I want to flesh out.
I
Um,
think you're doing good with the unputdownable, for sure. So
Thanks, Jade.
Definitely. I'm sorry. You just said this book could have been 600 pages, and you trimmed it down, trimmed it down, trimmed it down, trimmed it down. But does that mean that there's nothing left and we don't get a sequel?
So, if you had asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said that story is done. Start, done, right? Start and finished. Uh, I have learned that one must never say never. Um, I don't have any plans at this time to return to this universe. That said, there are enough breadcrumbs that I could. I see that, Jade. That I could. So I'm not ruling it out.
I think you made some people very happy. With just the possibility. That's good. Let's talk a little bit about like the religious stuff or the religion, the martial art. Jonah asks, what martial art is the Kim Vent practice based on, assuming that it has a basis in a known art?
It doesn't, but I trained for a while in an Indonesian kung fu called Pukulan. And one of the things that I really loved about Pukulan was um its fluidity. There's not the Venupakram is not based on that, but I wanted it to be something similar in that it had some overarching tenet to it that would make it a real thing, if you will. I can't find the noun. So for Pukulan, it was Pukulan is based on the movements of four animals, and that was like the the main thing about that particular martial art that I found compelling. None of, with the exception of, hey, you need to train every day, and hey, you need to work with some weapons and be able to defend yourself, and um uh hey, you need to meditate in order to learn how your body, like how to exist within the space of your body. But that is common across almost all martial arts. I mean, and in fact, if you take the weapons part out, I think it's common across all of them. Gross generalization, but I think that's true. So it wasn't patterned after a specific art. I just wanted it to be a full art within itself, along the same lines as sort of this universal approach to martial arts, if that makes sense. So not a real thing, not based on a real thing. The locus of control thing is honestly a philosophical tenet that I just try to live by. Like, dude, you can only affect so much. This is within your, furthermore, this is what you can do in this minute, maybe this 5 minutes, maybe this 10 minutes. And that's all you need to focus on, and quit being a stressful bitch. Like, that's me talking to myself, like CTFD, right? So I'm trying to watch my language here. But what's that?
We can handle it.
Okay, so definitely calm the fuck down, like all the time. And part of that is remembering, look, there's only so many things that are within your control. And so the concept of that really lent itself to the sort of martial art um uh not rule or whatever, but just like, this is your space and this is what you can affect within your space. And I thought, okay, what if I integrated that into this? And that became the core idea behind this art. Um, so, and originally the first draft was done like during NaNoWriMo. So most of this came to me at like 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm like, what am I going to write tomorrow? And some of those crazy ideas that come to us in the wee hours like that, um I think our higher brains going, hey dude, this is a thing you can do that's going to work, you should run with this, and it worked.
Yeah, I thought it was very like it was perfect for the situation they found themselves in somehow. Like Davia's like, okay, I don't see any creatures or whatever. What can I do now? I can do this. I'm like, oh my god. Like Kieran has she kind of picked up on that and just eased a little bit. Like relaxed in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot that they have to teach each other, and I think that it's really easy to see or to discern, I think, what Davia teaches Kieran, what Davia demonstrates for Kieran, but it's not as easy on the first pass to see what Kieran teaches Davia, which is, there is a whole lot that yes, you need to be focused on this, but you're not taking in all of the available data of what's within that space. And I don't even just mean like the galactic stuff, right? Or the your people are oppressing my people stuff. It's as simple as, we have crashed spaceships here, and you've got a pile of stuff that you think is junk that we could be using to make all of this much easier for us. Um, or um the way that you're carrying yourself isn't like, that's not the way that people interact. Like, this distance that Davia has through her own experience, and you don't really find out why that distance exists until part 2.
Mhm.
But Davia has done a lot of that to just protect herself. That's the way that she protects the heart of herself. And Kieran's like, you got to unlock some of that stuff, man, or you're missing out on a whole wide swath of what human existence means. So it's much more of a balanced give and take than might be seen on that first glance. Dude, I'm chatty today. I hope that's good.
Well, I was just looking at the clock and I'm like mindful of the time. Do you have like a time for 2, 3 more questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. I have one from Elodie. She says, where the hell did you get the idea for the giant shelled creatures? They have the possibility to haunt one's dreams.
I hate bugs.
Who doesn't?
That's it. That's it. I hate bugs. I'm like, what is the grossest thing that we could do here? What would that like? And I'm like, it's a desolate planet. Like, it can't be something that eats plants. There's not many plants. It can't be something that is a predator that eats other beasties, because there's only like worms and basically overgrown cockroaches, right? So, or the idea behind the overgrown cockroaches came from what can survive on next to nothing, which actually means what can survive by basically being a cannibal, because all they can do is eat each other, right? Or the worms, I guess. They can eat the worms. I try not to think about the worms. I really do. Um, uh, but yeah, I'm just like, okay, so what would that be? Probably a cockroach. All right, let me make it more like an insect. Let me make it really gross, like kind of like a crab. And I'm like, okay, let's just put all of those things in one thing and make them, and not
Eat
only
it
that,
and then make them eat it?
and then make them eat it.
And
But
got it.
also, um,
Ugh.
make them so that they can be multiple sizes, right? So I tried to keep it simple and then just make it as weird as possible.
And gross.
And gross.
Yeah,
It's
thanks for
gross.
Yeah.
Like, I did, however, get a sick pleasure in describing that scene from 2 angles where she's just eviscerating the corpses. I don't do horror, at all. Like, it's not my jam. I make exceptions when there are very, very hot women with big weapons involved, but for the most part, no. But in this case, I'm like, okay, look, I gotta get this across, and I don't want to hammer this point over and over and over and over again. Um, I got to make this one scene. I got to make it as gross as possible so that the concept sticks, and then drop the mic. And that's what I tried to do.
It worked. Yeah. It was
But my,
gross.
yeah,
It's gross.
I was thinking like, um, is it like, it's a weird question now, but okay. Is it difficult to leave this world that you've created behind, like during the writing? I mean, you have just created like the grossest thing ever, and then it's dinner time. I mean, ew. Did you
Uh,
eat, did you
no,
not eat for a week?
I don't know if it's like a good character trait or a bad character trait, but I can compartmentalize very well.
Well,
So, all right, we're done. What's for dinner?
Next.
good.
Don't think
And
about
then,
it.
and then your wife says, "We have crabs."
So fair enough.
Not today.
My wife is a vegetarian,
Oh,
so
good.
you know,
That works out.
that's safe. That tracks.
Do you have another
I
one, Blade?
I actually am curious if there's anything about either the story or writing it that we haven't talked about that you want to tell us about that you maybe you wish we'd asked a question about, but we didn't get around to.
This might be a safe space to ask. Like there are some chances that I took in this book, and I want to know if they were off-putting. Like, it's a dual POV novel, but I don't drop the second POV until 30-40% in.
Mhm.
Um uh were I wanted the sexy bits to be I wanted them to be hot, but not over the top. No pun intended. Um, one of the one of the comparisons I got said with sex, a lot of sex, and I didn't think there was too much. Um, but that was like it was a conscious choice, and it was not this is the word choice here, not meant to be titillating. It was not meant to be, ooh, and now there's a sexy bit. Like, no, these are two women. They're going to get it on. Like, that's going to happen a couple of times in this novel, but I didn't want it to be too much, and I hope that that's true. Um, what else? I think I already talked about the choice of how I tied up some of the political challenges. And I guess I wanted to make it clear, like, it was never intended to be, these folks are going to get along now. They've declared independence and everything's going to be great. No. What they're not going to do, however, is kill each other, right? There's still going to be a very adversarial relationship between the independents and Safani Prime, but they're just not going to go to war over it. I needed that to be a thing. I did not, however, think that it would be perceived as a neat resolution. I just wanted it to be a relatively peaceful one. But yeah, other than that, hit me with the weird.
I thought it was like precarious truce, something.
Yeah,
It was still like, ooh, let's see how this is gonna work. If someone has a bad day, it's gonna blow up in our faces, but whoo, for now it's good.
yeah.
So I hear like second, third, fourth books.
There's some road. There's some road. I don't know when I'm gonna get back on that road, but there's some road.
Good. Well, we'll point you to it.
Oh, before you next question, I just want to say I see some really familiar faces here, and I just want to let you all know hi.
Good.
I did in the book club hear some there was some talk about kind of like the wrap up and I guess kind of that political piece. And I do think there was room to do more there, but I don't think that it was necessary. And I do think it kind of came across, like Caroline said, like I didn't ever think that everything was just all good and there were going to be no more problems. I definitely felt like I feel like resolution would be putting it generously. I felt like the place they were at was definitely a bit tenuous. Um, and so I think that's where some of the conversation about the more that there could have been came up, because it was both relationally and kind of, I guess, universally. It was all kind of tenuous at the end. So I definitely felt that. Um, I'm happy if anybody else has comments, I'm happy to read those if anybody has any more thoughts about that. Um, I felt like the sexy bits, as you call them, I feel like they all made sense where they were in the book. It never felt like we were going along in this sci-fi story and then, oh, let's pop in a sex scene. Like, it didn't do that to me at all. It all felt like it flowed
Good.
really nicely. Um, I do remember being a little bit shocked at the POV switch because it was so far in and I didn't realize that's we were going to do it. But as soon as I realized, I had that moment of like, oh my God. And then I was like, yes, I'm going to get like this other thing that I just didn't think I was going to have. And so I loved it. It did shock me. I was surprised by where it landed. But it very quickly turned, for me at least, from surprise to like really excited that I was going to get that other POV. So
Awesome.
that was my
I'm
experience.
glad.
I saw some heads nodding as I was talking a little bit, so I think that was fair.
Jonna says, I love the part 2 perspective shift. I was delighted to get to know Davi as well as I knew Kieran. I was impressed that you covered some of the same ground really well and not repetitively.
Thank my editor. Initially there was a lot more but it was coming at the same scenes, and that is not a way in this story, I thought, to keep people engaged. But I needed to show, I look, I tried it as a the chapter switch, 1 2 1 2. It didn't work. If you had those details from Davia sooner, it did a weird thing with the pacing of the book, and I didn't like it. I'm like, no, there has to be more of a punch here, and so I'm glad that worked.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I will devolve into craft so quickly, like I have to watch it.
Okay. I think we're out. I'm well for now out of questions from everyone.
And time.
And time. Yeah, that's the most important thing. I saw that Michelle had to leave already, so Virginia, thank you so much for joining us and well, answering all our burning questions.
I do want to ask, does everyone on the call have, like, do you have the book? Because if you don't, I've got the first few chapters I'm happy to share. So I'll drop it in to Carolyn.
Yeah, that's good.
And if anybody does not have it, they can at least get the first few chapters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate your time and the energy you brought us here today.
Thanks. Like I said, I'm in hardcore Saturday mode already, but thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to see some familiar faces. It's great to talk about this book I love so much, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed the story.